White young thieves laugh at old black man, then flee in terror when he shows his badge. The sun was setting over Maple Street, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The quiet suburban neighborhood of Oakwood Hills was settling into its evening routine. Porch lights flickered on, and the smell of home-cooked dinners wafted through open windows. In this peaceful setting, at the end of a tree-lined street, stood the modest home of Mr. James Carter. Mr. Carter's house was small but well-kept. The white paint was a bit faded, and the green shutters needed a touch-up, but the neatly trimmed lawn and the colorful flower beds showed that someone cared for this place. A worn rocking chair sat on the front porch, facing the street. It was Mr. Carter's favorite spot to watch the world go by. At first glance, Mr. James Carter looked like any other elderly man in the neighborhood. He was tall but slightly stooped, with a thin frame that spoke of years gone by. His dark skin was etched with wrinkles, each line telling a story of a life well lived. His hair was a crown of silver, neatly trimmed and always combed. He moved slowly, with the help of a wooden cane, but his eyes were sharp and alert, missing nothing that happened on his street. To most of his neighbors, Mr. Carter was just a kind old man who lived alone. They would wave as they passed by, sometimes stopping for a brief chat. Mr. Carter always had a friendly smile and a wise word for anyone who took the time to talk to him. But few knew the full story of the man who lived in that small white house. Mr. Carter had lived in Oakwood Hills for over 40 years. He had moved in when the neighborhood was new, one of the first black families to make their home in this part of town. Over the years, he had seen the area change and grow. He had watched young families move in, raise their children, and move on. He had been a constant presence, a pillar of the community that few really knew. Inside his home, Mr. Carter lived a simple life. His living room was filled with comfortable, well-worn furniture. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with everything from detective novels to history books. Photos of family and friends, some old and faded, others newer and brighter, covered every available surface. Each one held a memory, a piece of the life Mr. Carter had lived. In recent months, however, a shadow had fallen over the peaceful neighborhood of Oakwood Hills. Reports of break-ins and petty thefts had started to circulate. At first, it was just small things, a bicycle left out overnight, a garden gnome from someone's front yard. But as time went on, the crimes got bolder. Homes were broken into, valuables stolen while families were out for the day. The victims were often the elderly residents of the neighborhood, those who lived alone, those who seemed most vulnerable. The police increased their patrols, but the thieves were clever, always staying one step ahead. The once quiet streets of Oakwood Hills were now filled with nervous whispers and worried glances. Mr. Carter watched all of this from his front porch. He saw the fear growing in his neighbors' eyes. He heard the worried conversations at the local grocery store, and he felt a familiar stirring in his bones, a call to action that he hadn't felt in many years. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Maple Street, a group of young men appeared at the far end of the road. They moved with a swagger, confident and bold. Their eyes darted from house to house, assessing, planning. These were the thieves who had been terrorizing Oakwood Hills. At the head of the group was Jason, a tall, lean teenager with shaggy blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. He walked with the confidence of someone who believed the world owed him something. His hands were shoved deep in the pockets of his ripped jeans, and a smirk played on his lips as he surveyed the quiet street. Flanking Jason were his two friends, Mark and Kevin. Mark was shorter and stockier, with close-cropped brown hair and a permanent scowl. He was the muscle of the group, always ready for a fight. Kevin, on the other hand, was thin and wiry, with nervous eyes that darted back and forth. He was the lookout, always on edge, always watching for trouble. The three young men had grown up together in a rougher part of town. They had bonded over shared hardships and a common resentment towards those they saw as having an easier life. Jason had convinced them that taking what they wanted was easier than earning it, and so far, he had been right. As they walked down Maple Street, Jason's eyes landed on Mr. Carter's house. He nudged Mark and pointed. "Look at that place," he said, his voice low. Bet that old-timer's got a bunch of valuable junk stored away. Mark grinned, cracking his knuckles. Easy pickings, he agreed. These old folks never expect anyone to mess with them. Kevin, however, looked nervous. I don't know, guys, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe we should find somewhere else. This street looks too quiet. Jason turned on Kevin, his eyes flashing with anger. Don't be a wimp, he snapped. Quiet is good. Quiet means no one's watching. No one's gonna catch us. Kevin fell silent, but his eyes continued to dart around, looking for any sign of danger. Jason turned back to Mr. Carter's house, a plan already forming in his mind. Here's what we're gonna do, he said, pulling Mark and Kevin close. We'll watch the place for a few days, figure out the old man's routine. Then, when he's out, we'll make our move. Mark nodded eagerly, always ready to follow Jason's lead. Kevin hesitated for a moment, but eventually nodded as well. He knew better than to argue with Jason when he had his mind set on something. For the next few days, the three young men kept a close eye on Mr. Carter's house. They watched from a distance, hidden in the shadows of nearby trees or parked cars. They saw Mr. Carter leave each morning for his daily walk, always at the same time. They watched as he returned, usually an hour later, leaning heavily on his cane. Jason's confidence grew with each passing day. This is going to be so easy, he boasted to his friends. That old man probably can't even remember where he puts his stuff. We'll be in and out before he knows what hit him. Mark laughed at Jason's jokes, his excitement building as the day of the planned break-in approached. Even Kevin started to relax, lulled into a false sense of security by the predictability of Mr. Carter's routine. What the young thieves didn't realize was that they weren't as invisible as they thought. Mr. Carter, with his keen eyes and years of experience, had noticed their presence from the very first day. He saw the way they watched his house, the way their eyes followed him as he went about his daily routine, but he gave no sign that he was aware of their presence. Instead, he continued his daily walks, continued to rock in his chair on the front porch, all the while keeping a watchful eye on the three young men who thought they had found an easy target. As the day of the planned break-in dawned, tension filled the air. Jason, Mark, and Kevin gathered in their usual hiding spot, watching Mr. Carter's house with eager eyes. They saw the old man leave for his walk, moving slowly down the street with his cane, tapping a steady rhythm on the sidewalk. This is it, Jason said, his voice filled with excitement. Let's go. The three young men approached the house, trying to look casual in case any neighbors were watching. Jason led the way, his picking the lock on the front door. Within moments, they were inside. The interior of Mr. Carter's home was dim and quiet. The smell of old books and furniture polish filled the air. Jason, Mark, and Kevin spread out, their eyes scanning the room for anything valuable. Check out all these old books, Mark said, running his fingers along the spines of the volumes lining the shelves. Bet some of these are worth something. Kevin was looking at the photos on the mantel. Guys, he said, his voice hesitant, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. This old man's got a family. Look at all these pictures. Jason snorted. Who cares? He said, already rifling through drawers. Family didn't stop him from leaving all this stuff here for us to take, did it? As they searched the house, the young thieves grew bolder. They laughed and joked, mocking the old man whose home they were invading. They imitated his slow walk, made fun of his cane, imagined how helpless he would be if he caught them. Oh no, Jason said in a high, quavering voice. Please don't take my dentures, young man. I need them to eat my mush. Mark doubled over with laughter, nearly dropping the silver picture frame he had been examining. Even Kevin cracked a smile, his earlier hesitation forgotten in the thrill of the moment. But their laughter died in their throats as they heard the front door open. They froze, eyes wide with sudden fear. This wasn't part of the plan. Mr. Carter wasn't supposed to be back yet. Jason was the first to recover. He straightened up, pasting a cocky smile on his face. Don't worry, he whispered to his friends. I'll handle this. As Mr. Carter stepped into his living room, he found himself face to face with the three young men who had been watching his house. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Jason stepped forward, his stance aggressive, his smile turning into a sneer. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with false bravado. "Looks like Grandpa came home early. What's the matter, old-timer? Forget your way to the park?" Mr. Carter stood in the doorway, leaning on his cane. His face was calm, showing no sign of fear or anger. He looked at each of the young men in turn, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Young man," he said, his voice deep and resonant, "I believe you and your friends are in my home uninvited." Jason laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it now. This wasn't how he had expected the old man to react. Where was the fear? Where was the trembling voice begging them not to hurt him? "Yeah, we are," Jason said, trying to regain control of the situation. "And what are you going to do about it, Gramps? Call the cops? We'll be long gone before they get here." Mark stepped up beside Jason, cracking his knuckles menacingly. Kevin hung back, his eyes darting between Mr. Carter and the window, clearly looking for an escape route. Mr. Carter didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, his eyes never leaving the young men who had invaded his home. And in that moment, despite their bravado, despite their youth and their strength, Jason, Mark, and Kevin felt a flicker of doubt. They had come expecting an easy target, a frail old man they could intimidate and rob without consequence. Instead, they found themselves facing someone who showed no fear, someone whose calm demeanor made them question everything they thought they knew. As the standoff continued, tension filled the room. The young thieves, so confident just moments ago, found themselves shifting uneasily under Mr. Carter's steady gaze. And in the silence, the ticking of the old clock on the mantel seemed to grow louder, marking each passing second of this unexpected confrontation. The story of Mr. James Carter and the three young thieves who thought they had found an easy mark was just beginning. And as the sun continued to set over Oakwood Hills, casting long shadows through the windows of that modest White House on Maple Street, no one could have predicted how this encounter would end. The silence in Mr. Carter's living room was broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. Jason, Mark, and Kevin stood frozen, their earlier bravado evaporating under Mr. Carter's steady gaze. The old man's calm demeanor was unsettling, so different from the fear and helplessness they had expected. Mr. Carter took a step forward, his cane tapping softly on the hardwood floor. "Young men," he said, his voice deep and resonant, "I believe we need to have a conversation about the choices you're making today." Jason, trying to regain control of the situation, let out a nervous laugh. "We don't need to hear any lectures from you, old-timer. Just hand over your valuables, and we'll be on our way." But even as the words left his mouth, Jason felt a twinge of doubt. Something about Mr. Carter's posture, the way he held himself, suggested that this was no ordinary elderly man. Mr. Carter shook his head slowly. "I'm afraid it's not that simple, son. You see, you've broken into my home, and that's a serious offense. But more than that, you're on a path that leads nowhere good. I've seen it too many times before." Kevin, his eyes darting nervously between Mr. Carter and the window, spoke up. "What do you mean, you've seen it before? Who are you?" A small smile played on Mr. Carter's lips. "I'm just an old man now, but I wasn't always. There was a time when I dealt with young men like yourselves every day." As he spoke, Mr. Carter's hand moved slowly towards the inside pocket of his jacket. The three thieves tensed, unsure of what to expect. "You gonna call the cops, Gramps?" Mark sneered, but his voice lacked conviction. Mr. Carter's hand emerged from his jacket, holding something that glinted in the fading afternoon light. "No need to call them," he said calmly. "They're already on their way." With a flick of his wrist, Mr. Carter opened the worn leather wallet he held, revealing a polished detective's badge. The sight of it hit the young thieves like a physical blow, causing them to stumble back in shock. You're a cop?" Jason stammered, his face pale. "Retired now," Mr. Carter replied, his voice taking on a hint of steel. "But I spent 40 years on the force, most of it working with juvenile offenders. Boys like you who thought they could take shortcuts in life." The three young men exchanged panicked glances. This was not how they had expected their heist to go. The easy target they had picked out had turned out to be anything but easy. Mr. Carter continued, his eyes never leaving the face of each young man in turn. "I've seen where this road leads, boys. I've watched young men with all the potential in the world throw their lives away for a moment's thrill or a quick buck." As he spoke, Mr. Carter moved further into the room, his earlier frailty seeming to melt away. He stood straight and tall, his presence filling the space. "Let me tell you about some of the cases I worked on," he said, his tone conversational, but with an underlying intensity that held the thieves spellbound. "There was a young man, not much older than you, who started out just like this. Petty theft, breaking into homes. He thought he was clever, thought he'd never get caught." Jason swallowed hard, feeling a chill run down his spine as Mr. Carter's words hit too close to home. "That young man is now serving a life sentence," Mr. Carter continued. "One of his break-ins went wrong, and an elderly woman had a heart attack. He never meant for anyone to get hurt, but intentions don't matter much when you're facing a judge." Kevin let out a small whimper, his earlier bravado completely gone. Mark stood stock still, his face a mask of fear and regret. Mr. Carter turned his attention to Jason, seeming to recognize him as the leader. "And you, young man, you remind me of another case I worked. A bright kid, could have gone to college, had a real future. But he fell in with the wrong crowd, started to believe that the world owed him something." Jason felt exposed, as if Mr. Carter could see right through him, could read every thought and insecurity. "That young man thought he was untouchable," Mr. Carter said softly, "right up until the moment the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. I'll never forget the look in his eyes when he realized that his life as he knew it was over." The room fell silent once more, the weight of Mr. Carter's words hanging heavy in the air. The three young thieves stood motionless, their earlier cockiness replaced by genuine fear and dawning regret. It was Jason who finally broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. What's going to happen to us?" Mr. Carter's expression softened slightly. "That depends on you, son. The police are on their way. I triggered a silent alarm when I entered the house. But what happens next is still, in many ways, up to you." As if on cue, the distant wail of police sirens could be heard, growing louder with each passing second. Kevin let out a strangled sob, while Mark's tough guy facade crumbled completely, leaving him looking young and scared. "You have a choice to make right now," Mr. Carter said, his voice taking on an urgent tone. "You can run, try to escape. Maybe you'll get away, maybe you won't. But if you do, you'll be looking over your shoulder for the rest of your lives." The sirens were getting closer now, the flashing lights visible through the windows. Jason, Mark, and Kevin looked at each other, panic clear in their eyes. "Or," Mr. Carter continued, "you can stay. Face the consequences of your actions. It won't be easy, but it might be the first step towards turning your lives around." For a moment, it seemed as if the young thieves might bolt. Jason's eyes darted towards the back door, clearly considering making a run for it. But then, something in Mr. Carter's steady gaze seemed to reach him. With a defeated slump of his shoulders, Jason nodded. "Okay," he said softly, "we'll stay." Mark and Kevin, following their leader's cue, nodded as well. The fight had gone out of them, replaced by a mix of fear and resignation. Mr. Carter's expression softened further. "You're making the right choice, boys. It may not feel like it now, but trust me, this is the first step towards a better future." As the police cars pulled up outside, lights flashing and sirens blaring, Mr. Carter moved towards the front door. "Wait here," he instructed the young men. "I'll speak to the officers first." The next few minutes passed in a blur for Jason, Mark, and Kevin. They watched through the window as Mr. Carter spoke with the arriving officers, his manner calm and authoritative. Even from a distance, it was clear that the police treated him with respect, listening intently to what he had to say. Finally, Mr. Carter returned, accompanied by two uniformed officers. "These officers will take you into custody now," he said gently. "Remember, boys, this isn't the end. It's a chance for a new beginning." As the young thieves were led out of the house in handcuffs, they each paused to look back at Mr. Carter. The old man they had dismissed as an easy target now stood tall and dignified, a far cry from the frail figure they had mocked earlier. Jason, the last to be let out, locked eyes with Mr. Carter. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. Jason saw in Mr. Carter's eyes not judgment, but a glimmer of hope. Hope for a better future. Hope that this moment could be a turning point. As Jason was escorted to the waiting police car, his mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. The consequences of his actions were finally sinking in, and the reality of his situation hit him like a punch to the gut. He thought about his family, his friends, and the life he might have just thrown away. But amidst the fear and regret, there was also a small spark of something else, a determination to make things right, to prove to Mr. Carter that his faith wasn't misplaced. Mark and Kevin were already seated in separate police cars, their faces pale and scared. As Jason was placed in the back of the third car, he caught a final glimpse of Mr. Carter standing on his porch, watching them with a mixture of sadness and hope. The doors slammed shut, and the police cars began to pull away from the curb. As they drove through the quiet streets of Oakwood Hills, Jason leaned his head against the cool glass of the window, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. The neighborhood he had seen as a hunting ground just hours ago now seemed like a different world entirely. Back at his house, Mr. Carter watched until the police cars disappeared from view. He let out a heavy sigh, feeling the weight of the day's events settle on his shoulders. Despite the years that had passed since his retirement, the familiar mix of emotions that came with every case, hope, worry, determination, washed over him once again. Returning to his living room, Mr. Carter surveyed the disarray left by the young thieves. Books knocked off shelves, drawers pulled open, his belongings scattered about. But as he began to set things right, his mind was not on the mess, but on the three young men who had just left in police custody. He thought about the cases he had worked over his long career, the countless young people he had seen enter the criminal justice system. Some had turned their lives around, finding a better path. Others had become trapped in a cycle of crime and punishment, their potential wasted. As he straightened a picture frame on the mantel, a photo of himself in his police uniform, taken many years ago, Mr. Carter found himself hoping that Jason, Mark, and Kevin would be among those who found their way to a better life. The rest of the evening passed quietly. Mr. Carter prepared a simple dinner, ate while reading the newspaper, and then settled into his favorite armchair with a well-worn detective novel. But his mind kept drifting back to the events of the day. Just as he was considering turning in for the night, there was a knock at his door. Opening it, he found himself face to face with Detective Sarah Thompson, a former colleague from his days on the force. "Evening, James," she said with a warm smile. "Hope I'm not disturbing you. I wanted to check in after everything that happened today." Mr. Carter welcomed her in, leading her to the living room. "Not at all, Sarah. It's good to see you. Coffee?" As they sat with steaming mugs, Detective Thompson shook her head in admiration. "I have to say, James, you handled that situation today like you'd never left the force. Those boys didn't know what hit them." Mr. Carter chuckled softly. "Well, I may be retired, but some instincts never fade. How are the young men doing?" Detective Thompson's expression turned serious. "They're scared, as you can imagine. But I think you really got through to them, especially the leader, Jason. He's been asking to speak with a counselor, wants to know about programs for troubled youth." A small smile played on Mr. Carter's lips. "That's good to hear. There's hope for those boys yet." They talked for a while longer, discussing the case and reminiscing about old times. As Detective Thompson prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "You know, James, we could use someone like you working with our youth outreach programs. Your experience, your way with troubled kids, it could make a real difference." Mr. Carter raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Are you offering me a job, detective?" She laughed, more like extending an invitation. "Think about it, will you? We'd be lucky to have you." After she left, Mr. Carter returned to his armchair, mulling over the detective's words. He had thought his days of active community involvement were behind him, but perhaps there was still more he could do. As he gazed out the window at the quiet street, Mr. Carter found himself feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The encounter with the young thieves, as unsettling as it had been, had awakened something in him, a desire to continue making a difference, to help guide young people towards a better path. With a determined nod, Mr. Carter made his decision. Tomorrow, he would call Detective Thompson and accept her offer. His days of chasing criminals might be over, but his work in shaping young lives was far from finished. As he finally prepared for bed, Mr. Carter felt a sense of anticipation he hadn't experienced in years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. And as he drifted off to sleep, his last thoughts were of Jason, Mark, and Kevin, and the hope that they too were on the cusp of a new and better chapter in their lives. The next morning, Mr. Carter woke early, feeling more energized than he had in years. After his usual routine of stretching exercises and a light breakfast, he picked up the phone and dialed Detective Thompson's number. "Sarah? It's James Carter. I've been thinking about your offer, and I'd like to take you up on it. When can I start?" Detective Thompson's voice was warm with approval. "I'm glad to hear it, James. Why don't you come down to the station this afternoon? We can go over the details and introduce you to the team." As Mr. Carter prepared for his visit to the police station, his mind wandered to Jason, Mark, and Kevin. He wondered how they had spent their first night in custody, whether the reality of their situation had fully sunk in yet. At the police station, Mr. Carter was greeted with respect and enthusiasm by his former colleagues. Many of the younger officers knew him by reputation only, and they listened intently as he shared stories from his years on the force. Detective Thompson introduced him to the Youth Outreach Team, a dedicated group of officers and social workers committed to steering at-risk youth away from crime. As Mr. Carter listened to their plans and ideas, he felt a familiar spark of excitement. This was where he could make a real difference. "We're planning to start a mentorship program," one of the social workers explained, "pairing troubled teens with positive role models from the community. Your experience would be invaluable in shaping this program, Mr. Carter." Mr. Carter nodded thoughtfully. "I'd be happy to help. In fact, I think I might know where we can start." Later that afternoon, Mr. Carter found himself sitting across from Jason in an interview room at the Juvenile Detention Center. The young man looked different now, his cocky demeanor replaced by a mix of shame and uncertainty. "Mr. Carter," Jason said, his voice barely above a whisper, I'm sorry for what we did. I never thought." Mr. Carter held up a hand, silencing him gently. "I'm not here for apologies, Jason. I'm here to talk about your future." Over the next hour, Mr. Carter listened as Jason poured out his story. His troubled home life, the peer pressure that had led him into crime, his secret dreams of going to college and making something of himself. "It's not too late, you know," Mr. Carter said as their time drew to a close. "You've made mistakes, yes, but you're young, and you have the chance to turn things around. Are you willing to work for it?" Jason nodded eagerly, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Yes, sir. I'll do whatever it takes." Mr. Carter smiled. "Good, because I'm going to hold you to that promise." Over the next few weeks, Mr. Carter threw himself into his new role with the Youth Outreach Program. He worked tirelessly, drawing on his years of experience to connect with troubled teens and guide them towards better choices. He kept a particularly close eye on Jason, Mark, and Kevin. Through a combination of counseling, education programs, and community service, the three young men began to show signs of real change. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks and moments of doubt. But slowly, surely, they started to turn their lives around. As the months passed, Mr. Carter's influence spread beyond the Youth Outreach Program. He became a respected figure in the community, often called upon to mediate disputes or offer advice to families struggling with wayward teens. One sunny afternoon, almost a year after the break-in, Mr. Carter sat on his front porch, enjoying the warm breeze. A familiar figure appeared at the end of the street, Jason, walking with purpose, a backpack slung over his shoulder. "Mr. Carter," Jason called out as he approached. "I did it. I got accepted to community college. I start classes next month." Mr. Carter's face broke into a wide smile. "That's wonderful news, Jason. I'm proud of you." As they sat talking on the porch, Mr. Carter reflected on the journey of the past year. The scared, angry young man who had broken into his home was gone, replaced by a motivated, hopeful individual ready to embrace a better future. It hadn't been an easy road. There had been moments of frustration, times when it seemed like old habits would win out. But Mr. Carter had persevered, drawing on his years of experience and his unwavering belief in the potential for change. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over Maple Street, Mr. Carter and Jason continued their conversation. They discussed Jason's plans for the future, his chosen major in social work, and his desire to give back to the community that had given him a second chance. "You know, Mr. Carter," Jason said, his voice filled with sincerity, "I never thought I'd say this, but getting caught that day, it was the best thing that could have happened to me. You showed me there was another way." Mr. Carter nodded, a mixture of pride and humility in his eyes. "You did the hard work, Jason. I just pointed you in the right direction." As Jason prepared to leave, Mr. Carter asked about Mark and Kevin. Jason's face lit up as he shared their progress. Mark had found a passion for mechanics and was apprenticing at a local garage. Kevin, always the most hesitant of the three, had finally opened up in group therapy and was making strides in rebuilding his relationship with his family. After Jason left, Mr. Carter remained on the porch, lost in thought. The neighborhood around him had changed in subtle ways over the past year. There was a new sense of community, a watchfulness that came not from fear, but from a shared commitment to looking out for one another. The next day, Mr. Carter arrived at the community center for his weekly mentoring session. As he entered the building, he was greeted warmly by staff and volunteers. The center had become a second home to him, a place where he could continue to make a difference in the lives of young people. In the main room, a group of teenagers was gathered, some looking bored, others nervous or defiant. These were the newest participants in the youth outreach program, each referred by the juvenile justice system or concerned family members. Mr. Carter took his place at the front of the room, leaning slightly on his cane. Despite the years that showed on his face, his eyes were bright and alert, filled with the same determination that had characterized his years on the police force. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice carrying easily across the room. "My name is James Carter, and I'm here to talk to you about choices." As he spoke, sharing stories from his career and from the past year of mentoring, Mr. Carter could see the subtle shifts in the teenagers' expressions. Boredom gave way to interest, defiance softened into curiosity. By the end of the session, several of the young people approached him, eager to talk one-on-one. Later that evening, as Mr. Carter walked home from the community center, he reflected on the day's events. The work was challenging, often frustrating, but deeply rewarding. He thought about Jason, Mark, and Kevin, about the countless other young people he had encountered over the years, both during his time on the force and in his new role as a mentor. As he turned onto Maple Street, Mr. Carter noticed a group of young men standing on the corner. For a moment, he was reminded of that day a year ago when Jason and his friends had targeted his home. But as he drew closer, he realized these were different young men, participants from the outreach program, gathered for a study group. They waved to Mr. Carter as he passed, calling out greetings and thanks for his help with their latest project. He smiled and waved back, feeling a surge of pride and hope for the future of his community. Reaching his front porch, Mr. Carter paused to look back down the street. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, much like it had on that fateful day a year ago. But now, instead of fear and suspicion, the neighborhood was filled with a sense of possibility and renewal. As he entered his home, Mr. Carter's eyes fell on the old detective's badge displayed on his mantel. Next to it stood a new photo, a group shot from the community center, showing Mr. Carter surrounded by smiling teenagers, including Jason, Mark, and Kevin. The contrast between the two images struck him. The badge represented his past, a career spent dealing with the aftermath of poor choices and lost opportunities. The photo represented his present and future, a new chapter dedicated to preventing those poor choices and creating new opportunities. Mr. Carter settled into his favorite armchair, picking up a book on youth psychology he'd been studying. As he read, his mind wandered to the challenges that lay ahead. There were still many young people in need of guidance, still many obstacles to overcome. But as he thought about Jason's excitement over his college acceptance, Mark's newfound passion for mechanics, and Kevin's progress in therapy, Mr. Carter felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had seen firsthand the power of second chances, the potential for change that existed in every young person, no matter how lost they might seem. As night fell over Oakwood Hills, Mr. Carter found himself filled with a quiet optimism. The neighborhood that had once been plagued by fear and suspicion was transforming, one young life at a time. And he, James Carter, retired detective turned mentor, was playing a crucial role in that transformation. The next morning, Mr. Carter woke early, eager to start another day. As he stepped out onto his porch, he noticed a small package leaning against his front door. Curious, he picked it up and read the attached note. Mr. Carter, I found this while cleaning out my grandpa's attic. Thought you might appreciate it. Thanks for everything. Jason. Opening the package, Mr. Carter found an old, leather-bound book on criminal psychology, its pages yellowed with age. As he flipped through it, a smile spread across his face. It was a first edition, a rare find that spoke volumes about Jason's thoughtfulness and growth. As Mr. Carter prepared for another day of mentoring and community outreach, he placed the book on his shelf, a tangible reminder of the impact one person could have on another's life. The journey from fear to hope, from suspicion to trust, was ongoing. But with each passing day, with each life touched and changed, the future of Oakwood Hills grew brighter. And so, as the sun rose over Maple Street, painting the sky in shades of hope and possibility, Mr. James Carter stepped out into the world, ready to continue his most important work, not as a detective solving crimes, but as a mentor preventing them, one young life at a time.